Hello everyone, it's History Behind the Warrior, and well, it finally happened. After 18 long years, or 8 to 9, depending on whether or not you'd want to count the Injustice games, we have finally had yet another crossover between the DC Universe and Mortal Kombat in the form of DC KO Boss Battle, a tie-in one-shot novel to the huge big Crisis event at the moment, which featured the likes of Shang Tsung, Sub-Zero, and Scorpion. Now for the somewhat purposes of this channel, I will ever so briefly be glossing over the events of the comic, as I do for the most part want to kind of focus on the Mortal Kombat side of things, as well. We kind of talk about it here if you haven't noticed, but it's kind of impossible for me to not review this thing as a whole, so I will ever so briefly be glossing over how we got to these events, breaking down and focusing on the Mortal Kombat elements of it, my overall thoughts on the fight and encounter here, and whether or not I do feel like they handled this IP well, because despite the promising premise that we do have here, a lot of the guest characters aren't handled particularly well, with some being given more time to flourish than that of others. So with that said, let's give you all a bit of a recap leading up into the events of this crossover. Now, as mentioned earlier, DC is in the midst of their current big Crisis event, that being DC KO, a battle royale like event that pits both heroes and villains against each other, with the victor being dubbed as King Omega. And the reason for such a tournament even taking place is due to Darkseid, having quite literally become a cosmic multiversal threat that is fated to destroy Earth. Thus, the tournament is designed to determine King Omega, someone who can contest with that vast power, leading us to where we are now, where the final four are confronted by a Booster Gold possessed Darkseid, and a perverse clone version of the Absolute Trinity. Yet before blows can be exchanged, this fight would be interrupted by the World Forger, an ancient primordial deity who was one of the hands responsible for creating this tournament. Knowing that the final four wouldn't be able to contest with this vast power, he would call forth multiverses beyond his own, and have the heroes set out and generate enough Omega energy to return with a fighting chance, even resurrecting a handful of allies for such a goal to be achieved. Hence how all of these different worlds and different characters are able to connect with each other here. And what I will say that was really cool, and something I did point out in my previous video kind of theorizing what's going on, is that Plastic Man and Black Lightning are dropped into the middle of a Mortal Kombat tournament. So I will say it's pretty cool how it's written for both tournaments to intersect with each other here. And what's also pretty damn unique about this timeline is that the presentation and layout of the arena is that of MK9, but the character designs are from Mortal Kombat 1. So it's a unique hybridized timeline that's completely different to the prior three canons. Or 4 if you want to include MK vs DC. Now the interruption of Mortal Kombat would lead to a 1v2 fighting situation, and at first it does look like a flawless victory for Sub-Zero. That is until Plastic Man unravels himself, revealing that he had protected Black Lightning, stunning the Cryomancer, and giving Plastic Man the window he needed in order to knock him out, marking an end to round 1. But going into round 2, this fight would be on more than even ground, being joined by Scorpion, who immediately joins the fight by impaling Black Lightning. Here, Plastic Man is just narrowly able to avoid Sub-Zero's ice, as well as Scorpion's spear, giving him the window of opportunity to throw Scorpion at Sub-Zero, which supposedly ends this contest in the hero's victory. But before we're really able to get an answer here, the windows and worlds across the different multiverses begin collapsing in together, bringing them all into one arena, where Sub-Zero can still be seen fighting Plastic Man, whereas Scorpion continues to battle Black Lightning. And just before we can have a true conclusion to these events, the World Forger does begin to sever these ties to those worlds, forcing the ninjas back to their tournaments as enough Omega energy had been gathered, marking a somewhat inconclusive end to this fight, as Plastic Man and Black Lightning also go back to being dead. So, what are my overall thoughts on this all? Well, it was pretty shit, wasn't it? Alright, look, Positives first before I get to my critique of this. I like the DC brand being able to cross over into MK to actually push it forward and put more eyes on it. Truth be told, I wouldn't mind these two universes crossing over a bit more if it was just kind of strictly a comic book thing. And I think for such a big event in a mainline title, I think it's pretty neat. I like that it was involved in some capacity. However, Boss Battle as a whole is a very ambitious and very underwhelming spin-off. There was only about 30 or so pages designed to accommodate 8 different guest characters from different universes here. So the panels were always going to be spread kind of thin. And I do feel like this really would have benefited from being at least twice that length. Because on the Mortal Kombat side of things, we're only given 4 pages strictly dedicated to the MK characters. And even then, they have like no personality here. Like, a lot of the guest characters, minus Annabelle, like have some real dialogue and personality to them. But for every Mortal Kombat panel, it's like an incredibly surface level caricature of the series. Like, they'll shout out round 1, fight, fatality, because that's the Mortal Kombat thing, right? But it feels so like incredibly dismissive of these characters we've had in media for 30 years now. I'm not expecting Shakespeare here, but I would like some dialogue, like actual dialogue, because neither Sub-Zero nor Scorpion really talk here. Which I also don't think is helped by the fact that these two iterations of the characters are possibly brothers. I presume off their character designs that they are brothers, but even so, if that is the case, I really don't like how they don't play off that possible sibling dynamic here, especially due to how popular the Fire and Ice duo are. I don't know, I just find it super baffling considering that WB owns both IPs. I definitely feel like a lot more could have been done in the writing department for their character, especially with vast contrast here when you compare them to the other guest characters that do appear in this annual. They ooze with personality. And yeah, I get it, ninjas, they're silent, they don't want to talk or whatever, but I really do feel like beyond the catchphrases, they could have done a lot better here. Which now takes us on to the fight, and I'll be honest, the outcome of this was always going to be pretty obvious here. Plastic Man is like one of those characters that is as powerful as the writer needs him to be. He's extremely hard to balance in that regard. With that said though, I'm not that big of a fan of how Sub-Zero and Scorpion were manhandled here, literally, in some cases. And I think it all kind of ties back into what I said of them feeling devoid of personality here. They feel more so like Blue Ninja and Yellow Ninja than they do Scorpion and Sub-Zero. If I am to find some positives, I do like that in the 4 pages we get here, Sub-Zero is able to freeze someone, Scorpion is able to spear someone. But beyond that substance, it felt like their skill in combat was super undermined because we don't really see much else. It's back to what I said a little bit earlier about them feeling very surface level. I feel like if there was some panels with them interacting with each other, or even fighting in hand-to-hand combat, it could have given them a lot more personality to work with here. It focused so much on their powers that the somewhat fighting game element of this didn't really feel there. That's why I think there's such a disconnect for this. Now, I have seen some people say that they were nerfed, and I do agree to a certain extent. It's hard to dictate how powerful these people are when you 1, place them up against Plastic Man, and 2, they don't really have any personality or character beyond their surface level design. I feel like this really hindered that experience, considering just how cool this idea is on paper. This definitely felt like a bit of an opportunity squandered, considering Mortal Kombat's own history with the DC brand, and that this was the first time in DC's main canon where the Mortal Kombat universe was finally included. It's absolutely far from like the worst thing ever, but it definitely does not help add to the conversation of how Mortal Kombat's been mishandled for the last 5 to 6 years, especially in the whole multiverse department, something that this is of course a part of. That said, whilst I did like elements of this, I do feel like it really would have benefited from more panels and an opportunity to introduce these characters beyond simply round 1, fight, and get over here. Could I recommend picking this up? For its price tag, sure. But could I generally recommend it if you're a hardcore fan? Probably not. So with that said and everything covered here, what are your thoughts on this crossover? Did you enjoy it and their inclusion? And would you be interested in seeing a Mortal Kombat vs DC universe too? Please do comment down below, as I'd love to hear what you have to say. Especially seeing as I feel like thoughts on this are going to be quite strong and opinionated. Anyway, until the next one everyone, that has been it for me. Take care.